everyone. We are going to get started. Sorry for the people on Zoom as I got our thing situated. Using 365 online is not as friendly as the desktop version. So we are going to today talk about accessibility and if it's worth your time and effort. And do you want to start introduction?
I'm McConville. I'm the coordinator of student accessibility and support services in the Learning Access Program, which is the Disability Services Office.
And I am Spade. I am also a coordinator with a really long title that has just changed. But what I do are the technology accommodations for students on our campus.
And I'm Tina in political science, and I'll be talking about a case of blind, visually impaired students in statistics and other similar math courses.
Patty, could you come up and repeat what you said because the people on Zoom couldn't hear you?
Sorry, friends on Zoom. I'm Patty McConville. I'm coordinator of student accessibility and support services in the Learning Access Program, which is the Disability Services Office.
And I'm Tara Luke. I'm a biology faculty, and I'm just going to be talking a little bit about a couple of easy things that you can do to make your PowerPoints or syllabi more accessible.
So we have a few objectives that we're going to try and cover today. At the end, we hope that you'll be able to identify some important updates within the Learning Access Program and some of our community partners, that you'll be able to compare the case study that we're going to provide to you with situations in your own classroom or workspace and formulate solutions on how accommodation needs can be met in your area, kind of thinking about some of the things that we're going to talk about. And also to identify accessibility tools that can help you in creating accessible materials, whether it's for your course or in your office space.
All right.
Patty's going to kick it off.
Have to stand literally back
right where Maria is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so I just wanted to provide some updates regarding some changes in our office and some campus-wide changes that have occurred that will affect some of your students that are registered with us. The first is to our note-taking services. We have faced a major challenge over the last several years with securing or hiring peer note takers, so other students to provide their notes to our office within 24 hours of the class, and our request they provide accurate class notes. But with the pandemic and students missing class, it became much more challenging to hire note takers that were staying in the class for the entire semester and turning in the notes to us within 24 hours of that class. So we've moved to a majority of our students who had peer note-taking services are now using software the main one is called Glean. It's an audio recording software so that they can listen to the lecture again later and improve upon their own notes. So we're giving them equal access to the lecture and the material that's presented in class. But they'll have the opportunity to improve upon their own notes rather than waiting for the set of peer notes after class. So those, so that's just you'll see more of our students with letters of accommodation that include the use of note-taking software, which underneath the accommodation for note-taking software is what we call our recording agreement, which is where the student, when they sign their letter of accommodation, agrees that they will not post your intellectual property, your lecture, on a website. They won't share it with their classmates, that it's just for their personal use, for their note-taking purposes only. So you will see that on the letter of accommodation. We have a lot of students that are that have aides or personal care attendants on campus. The challenge that we have is that they don't have to register with us to have a personal care attendant or an aide. So sometimes we don't know that they're in your classrooms. But if a student does, arrive in class with a personal care attendant, if you would please let us know, and we can reach out to the student, or you can, request the student reach out to us. But we have to register them and get them an affiliate like identification card. So we know, the university knows who's on campus and who's going to be in your classroom. So we just don't want to have random, individuals, accessing the campus and sitting in your classes. So we will issue them like an affiliate ID if they are, truly a personal care attendant. So two accommodations that we run into the most significant amount of faculty questions are the attendance policy waivers and extensions on assignments. And the reason why we have we face such a challenge with this is because a lot of our students that are coming out of the K through 12 special education setting, we're used to having a lot more flexibility than we're permitted to provide, here at Stockton. We cannot waive your attendance policy or require you to provide extensions if doing so is going to fundamentally alter your course or curriculum. And so underneath those accommodations where we request you consider an occasional extension or excused absence, there is a statement about our responsibility to participate in the interactive process to evaluate whether or not the student's need for that extension is first disability related, or absence is disability related, and then if it would, be a fundamental alteration of your course or curriculum. So we will be reaching out to you. I'll be talking about this tomorrow at the fall faculty conference as well. But if you have any questions about students with that accommodation, please reach out to us. But we'll be reaching out to faculty members, more often to have that conversation, engage in that conversation. So we are utilizing the interactive process. Unfortunately, we used to have a goals mentoring program. It was also called Skills for Success previously. This was a program that provided our students that were on the autism spectrum or had significant executive function concerns, ADHD, learning disabilities. They were provided with an individual second-year graduate occupational therapy student as a mentor. And they met with that individual 2 hours per week. And that person helped them really transition to life on campus and how they needed to behave and interact with faculty and as young professionals attending college. Unfortunately, the OT program decided to go in a different direction with their field work, the clinical placements. So that program has ended. So we don't have that transitional program anymore for our autism spectrum population. We have tried to a couple of different things to hoping that we can get eventually a position or somebody to work in our office specifically with this population, but we haven't gotten anywhere with that yet. So you will see students on campus. You'll continue to see students on campus that are neurodiverse. We have a reputation of being very friendly, autism friendly, friendly to and accommodating to our neurodiverse students. And many of their parents are, talk and share information with each other. So we have this population on our campus, and this semester we won't have that, program for them, anymore, but we're hoping that eventually we'll get something back that's similar to that program. That's all. Those are my updates. Thank you.
Did you want to?
Oh, yes. Do you want me to call it real quick? I don't want to take up too much of your time. So we also, so this information is about Stockton Cares. I think that you might get some more information about Stockton Cares tomorrow as well. But the request of Stockton Cares is that if you have any concern about a student, submit a care referral. Their office is like sort of like triaging any concern that you have about a student on campus. So I've put in a care referral when a student told me they didn't have a laptop, to use in class. Finance couldn't afford their books. Housing insecurity, food insecurity, or academic concerns. If a student shares with me that, they have been avoiding a faculty member's email for 6 weeks, like I'll put in a care referral, because CARES will reach out to the student and recommend what the resources on campus that can assist them. Okay, so when in doubt, I always personally put in a care referral. If it's unnecessary, I'd rather, have CARES determine that, the student's okay and they don't need our, services. Thank you.
So now we're gonna shift a little and we are going to go over a case study of a actual student that attended Stockton that me and Tina worked very closely with to make sure that they were able to graduate, which they kind of have graduated.
Actively graduate.
Actively graduated. They have completed their degree.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to go over a little bit about course material accessibility. Faculty and staff should always consider accessibility when they're designing their course or any material for your office. If you are working in an office and you're giving out materials to students, you need to make sure that they can access the information as well. So some things that you want to think about are when you're determining your textbook, making sure that they have alternate versions, which we're going to talk a little bit more about, Word documents and PowerPoints, making sure that they're accessible, when providing images or table, considering alternate descriptions and like verbal descriptions when you're going over things to explain, just not even necessarily for a student that is blind in your course. There could just be a student that auditorially needs to hear that information and does better by you explaining that chart that you put up versus just seeing it. Videos should have closed caption and audio descriptions. And this is one that if you got an email from me over the last 2 weeks, I'm sorry. I have a lot of students who are going to be using screen readers this year. So your PDFs need to be accessible. Unfortunately, if you use your school's photocopier and scan a document in to create a PDF, that is not accessible. That actually creates an image. So a screen reader will read that as blank. So that important text that you wanted them to receive, they're not getting it. There are different ways to do this. You can get the native document, which the library should be able to assist depending on where that native document is coming from. Our librarians are amazing and will help our faculty. But if you can't get that native document, they also have OCR scanners in the library that you can use to scan that document instead of using your school's photocopier. Use the library's scanner, and that will create an OCR recognition that will then work with a screen reader. So now we're going to go into the case study.
All right, so the general description of the case is here on the screen, but I think this case is important because it raises questions about which approach you should take with a blind or visually impaired student. And we'll talk about the two different approaches that you would generally take with any student who requires accommodations. It's either the individual path or you make your whole course accessible for everyone, regardless of potential disability. But there's a lot of gray area, especially around courses, academic programs that use software, for example. This particular case, we'll talk about statistical software, specifically Excel, SPSS, other examples. You may have similar software requirements where students who are in a required course for your degree must complete a series of exercises, maybe not even using software, but maybe in an environment where you granting them an accommodation becomes almost impossible. And the burden on the student becomes so steep that they're not able to complete that course or degree requirement. What do you do? And this will become a little bit more clear through the case. So I did want to highlight, and I can't point on the screen for Zoom, but I'm looking at the second to bottom bullet point here. So this particular student had no educational or career goals in quantitative research methods. This was the program outcome that is designed for all of our students in polls. Yet we relied on Godfrey and Lutz, our blind statisticians, and had published, I think 2015 was their most recent, but prior to that, they had been publishing about what do you do with graduate students in statistics programs. Then they started talking more about how to apply what they learned in mentoring blind statistics students in graduate school to the undergraduate level. And they focused on this criteria of educational and career goals. as a potential way for you to determine what's reasonable for a particular student in your academic program. Our solution in the end for this particular student was to drop the program requirement to learn a particular software, because it turns out that software is not accessible. We would have been placing too big of a burden on that particular student. All right, so here are the two options that I was referencing before. Many of you may be familiar with both of these. The first one, universal design for learning, Maria will spend a couple of minutes talking about next. And the whole idea there is that you are designing your course for any student with any disability for them to succeed. So from Maria mentioning making all the materials accessible for somebody who is visually impaired, you would also accommodate anybody who is impaired in any other way, like hearing. You would have ways of communicating that would, again, hit any type of disability. That's a pretty big basket when you're thinking about all the possible students that you might have. If you visualize like everyone here in F111, if you have a packed house and you have every disability represented in your particular classroom, it's difficult to design every single course to hit a hypothetical disability for every single student. The payoffs, though, can be quite great when you take that approach. In this case, in a statistics class, or again, in any class where you have a requirement that may or may not be adaptable to a universal design, and you probably use option 2 more often in any situation, but you are required by law to have this interactive dialogue with the student, facilitated, of course, by the disability office, to determine what's a reasonable accommodation for that particular student. This means that whatever I did for student A in this particular case may not suit a student that you might have, but you might end up with the same outcome in the same class for 2 students, or not at all the same outcome for the same 2 students with the same impairment. So, and I have found in talking to faculty that option 2, there's kind of a myth around, well, if I give accommodations to this student, I have to for this other student. But the individual approach is an interactive individual dialogue. So please try to think about these 2 different options in general as you're thinking about accessibility in your own courses. There's actually a lot of flexibility in option 2 for you to meet the needs of the students with disabilities in your courses.
So what is universal design for learning? Universal design for learning is made up of 3 different areas: engagement, representation, and action and expression. And using these 3 areas can help you to create accessible materials for your course and for your workplace. So the first is engagement. Talks about 3 different areas within engagement: recruiting interest, sustaining effort and persistence, and self-regulation. So information that does not engage learners, and this is just going to be in general, if your information is not engaging your learners, it's going to be inaccessible. You want to make sure that it's you have alternate ways to recruit the learner's interest, ways that reflect, the differences amongst all of your students. Some prefer to have the information visually, some prefer to hear it. So presenting that information in multiple ways. For sustaining effort and persistence, many kind of learning, particularly the skills and strategies, require attention and effort. And many learners can regulate their attention, but others cannot. They may be losing focus in your class. If you are continuously doing a very long lecture, there's a good chance you may have some students that are losing focus and are not picking up on that whole entire information. So thinking about different ways to maybe help students to self-regulate in this way, or breaking up some of the lecture to kind of give those breaks for the ones that need a few moments to refocus. That ability to self-regulate is very important, and it is something that we try and work with our students. With the introduction of the Glean program, this is a way for students to have autonomy over their notes and to help them with their self-regulation and focusing. So that's one way that we're trying to assist you in the classroom as well. But a successful approach requires providing all different alternatives to support these learners with varying aptitudes and prior experience to manage their own engagement and affect effectively. Sorry, I'm trying to go fast because I know we don't have a lot of time. The next section is representation. So there are, again, 3 areas within representation. We have perception, language and symbols, and comprehension. So learning is possible when the student is receiving this information. They are perceiving it in a manner that is very different than the person next to them. So to reduce these barriers for learning, it's important to ensure that the information is equally perceptible to all learners by providing the same information through those different modalities. Using solely pictures or images can also be very difficult for students because how they are perceiving that picture or image carries different meanings for different learners. This could be due to disability, but it could also be differing cultural or familial backgrounds. As a result, inequalities arise when the information is presented through only a single form of representation. And then for comprehension, the purpose of education is to teach learners how to transform accessible information into usable knowledge. Proper design and presentation of that information can provide the scaffolds necessary to ensure that all learners have access to this knowledge and can help them to actually comprehend what is happening in the classroom. And then the last section is action and expression. Within that, again, there's 3 different areas: physical action, expression and communication, and executive functioning. Physical action is that textbook or document that you are handing out. It's a print form and it provides limited means of navigation. So when you are assigning material, thinking about those alternate things, are there audiobooks that can be accompanied with it? If the material is only in print, can you teach all of the students how to use some of our screen readers that are available for all students? So if they don't personally know about it or have one, they can now get that information in an audio format. If anyone was not aware that we have screen readers that's available for all students and faculty and staff, please come see me. We pay for a site license, so everything could be turned into a readable document within your classroom. For expression and communication, again, I'm going to keep saying the same thing. It's important to provide that alternate modality, both to level that playing field, but to allow the learner to express their knowledge, ideas, and concept. So this would be, think about assessments. Are all of your assessments only written assessments? If you have somebody who is not a strong writer, maybe they are dyslexic and their writing is not as strong as another student, but they would be able to submit an audio file of an amazing article summary. Do you have different modalities for your assessments? Is that an option? For executive functioning, this one is, this is what we kind of talked about, what Patty talked about with our students for the goals program that was canceled. A lot of our students do have challenges with executive functioning. So what you want to do is kind of manage the skill level that they're coming in with and reducing some of that higher level, disability with strategies to improve their executive functioning skills. This is what our goals program did. So now you may see that you are going to have a little bit of a disconnect because what they were assisting with are things that they may now be coming to you and asking you these questions, or coming to us and asking us this question. So we might, be working a little more closely together with some of these students who have executive functioning that is, needs a little bit of additional assistance.
You see me keep making faces when they mention the goals program. I'm going, oh, it was such a great program. That's why. It's a sad face, the disappointed face. So how many of you have taught a blind student in your class? All right, maybe you will this semester.
How many know that they taught a blind student in their class?
So as you are reading, and I can say that because I do know most of you, but that is one thing that I actually observed during orientation in an orientation room where we had a blind student and our presenter kept saying, so look at this. but didn't actually say what was this. So here is a list of items. I do this frequently as well. I like to dump things on the screen. I know that's not best practice. That's something that you can manage in the classroom, talking through like, so you actually have to say everything on the screen. Here's where it can be really challenging for particular fields where it's not just reading something on a screen. So I'm going to give you a quick example. And I'm purposely not saying anything.
So our Zoom folks are really going to get the full effect of this because they're not going to get.
And we
the
can
same
twist
visual of
the camera as well. Okay. I can't draw the Chinese renminbi sign very easily, so apologies. It's a dollar sign. So for those of you on Zoom, we'll do the camera in a moment, but I'm going to do for you what I would do for the students in the class. So for those of you who are in the room, do you have any idea what I just drew on the board? And I'll start to give you like a few little hints. So we've got two different models here. And this would actually be like that. Bingo. Yep. So this visual is on one side. On the left, I've got pi. You may have heard like, this is not pi. It's a basic difference in approach to resources and our ideas about power in the world. There's a dollar sign there, but behind that is military as well. But if I draw these two figures on the board, one side shows just a basic line graph with the US at the top, and then China starts at the bottom, and it's a little wiggly line. It's not linear growth, but it's approaching American power. This is something that our students are really worried about, and we talk a little bit more about this. This is not the only time we talk about this, to be clear, but this is a really powerful visual representation of two concepts. So they actually have names. There's relative power, absolute power. If I have a student who is in my class who is unable to see this, I now have to describe it in detail, and I'm not doing a great job to the folks on Zoom, but I would need to take extra time to explain these concepts. You guys are just like my students in this intro level class where they're looking at this like, what is she doing? I don't know what's happening here. They don't know this either, and me slowing down and taking the time to explain what I've visually written on the board is actually just better teaching for everybody in the room. One of my first experiences teaching a blind student was in a political economy class where we use graphs almost every class, multiple graphs every class. It was my very first job out of grad school. I was like, oh, great. But you know what? It made the whole class better, actually. All of those students learned what those graphs meant. If you ever took an economics class and you had to, today, we don't have any economists here, if I called you up here and said, please draw a supply-demand graph, maybe you'd get that one. If you had to draw other graphs, maybe not. Maybe you wouldn't even be able to draw a basic supply-demand graph. But when you are teaching from this universal approach and you using just this basic example, again, you're improving the learning for everyone in the classroom, which is not the case for the student in this particular class. So I wanted to jump out and talk about this for a moment. But the obstacle that we faced in social sciences, you may face in NAMS as well with things like labs. So if you're saying at any point, like, look at, see this, that's just not going to be available for students with visual impairments. So in my field, the software, and I won't talk about this too much because we only have a couple people in the room, and even on Zoom who this is relevant for, but it's really critical. We don't have that many options for statistical software. The short punchline is that the only ones that are accessible are, do you remember which ones we met with? Stata. Stata is expensive. Does anyone in here have a Stata license? Maybe you didn't need one anyway, maybe in the Zoom room. They're just expensive. Our university pays for an SPSS license because it's cheaper. Excel, not that great either. The really good option turns out to be R, which is free, and it has a very steep learning curve for anyone to learn. It's coding based. If you're Gen X, it's actually not that bad because it's like you're in your basement on an Apple IIc, like, oh, I can code. I don't even know what it means, but I'm doing it. It's very similar to that and feels a lot like that. But for your students, that's very far away from their experience with computers, unless they've taken a language, which a lot actually have. But for most of them, you're not going to have an easy time teaching R. So you're stuck with a whole course around statistical software, and you have a blind student who wants a degree in your program. You can't get them to the finish line unless you teach them R, unless you design alternative assignments. And here is why you would not be able to get them to the finish line. So I'm going to go right past this. Maria and I actually presented to an audience at an international conference for political science, and we had statistical software reps there as well. So we went into why it's not great with SPSS, but here we go. Here's the experience of a blind student with the most common SPSS or statistical software.
SPSS. IBM SPSS Statistics 26. Control-N. C:\users\spat open button.
Close your eyes.
Menu. System menu. Restore unavailable. To navigate, press up or down. Bayesian statistics 1 sample binomial. A binomial random variable can't. Previous topic button to act. Next topic button to activate. Press space. Visit close button to activate. New files list view. New data
Kind
set.
of terrible to
1 of 2.
listen to.
Move
Go ahead and pop your
Untitled
eyes
1
open.
left.
We haven't even done anything yet. This is just the screen reader opening the statistical software. This would happen literally every single time the student opened the software and they don't even know how to use it yet. The experience is somewhat similar in Excel. There are different versions of Excel, of course, depending on whether you're a PC or Mac user. At this point, we did not keep going with Excel with this particular student because their career goals did not require that we did so. So here's the end of our case here. Here are some key questions. What's reasonable when you're a student? Maybe you have a student who can't finish a lab class that's critical to your degree program. What do you need to do? Depending on their career goals, you figure out an individual accommodation that can get them to graduation in a program that meets their career goals. Maybe it's in polls, maybe it's in bio, maybe it's a LIBA degree, but you need to have that interactive dialogue to figure that out. And the burden on the student needs to be taken into account. We can't push the burden onto disabled students for them to figure out the accommodations that we are willing to give them. That's not how the law works, the form of it and the intention of it. And this is what we landed on, kind of a review. All right, and here's more if you wanted to know about the actual assigned textbooks.
So the information that's up there shows so this is something that you would see in your classroom. We'll have students that will have on their letter that says use of an audiobook. This is what we do on our end in the Learning Access program. We find those audiobooks, but the audiobooks are not always in the same format. So this was the books that were assigned for this particular course. And as you can see, the variation between the versions that were available. The daisy are for those that are using braille readers. So that SPSS book is not available in the Beeline reader, which is the audiobook version. It was only available in the braille version. So if the student doesn't read braille, they now don't have a copy other than one. I think there might be a word one that could be used. So the Beeline reader is what we mainly look for the students in your course, because it's going to give them the full capacity to your textbook. The braille reader will as well, but if they don't read braille, it's not helpful for them. So the SPS book that was already a challenge to begin with, the program, the book couldn't even be used to help the student learn how to use the program because it wasn't in a manner that they were able to use. So these are things that I say when, you know, when you're thinking about textbooks and alternate copies, like seeing what it's available in.
Yeah. And we should look for Beeline.
So you may not necessarily know that offhand. The publisher should. The publisher should be able to tell you. They should be able to give you a VPAT of any software or textbooks and tell you what it is accessible in. We want it to be in Bookshare as much as possible. Bookshare is the platform that we use, and it's one of the easier ones for our students who are using audiobooks. And that's where the Beeline reader is.
So thank you. And for more practical tips on things that you can incorporate this semester with any students, whether you have a blind student or not, we'll turn it over to Tara.
Hi. So I want to tell you about a couple of things. One thing that is actually really important to know about is the Blackboard accessibility tool called Ally. As this says, it is included with Blackboard, and it provides accessible document formats to students. So if you click on the little Ally link, it will allow you to download different formats of whatever documents are up there. But not all documents are equally accessible. So it also guides faculty in making courses more accessible by letting you know whether or not your files that you're uploading into Blackboard are accessible. And by accessible, we mean basically, can a screen reader read them in the order that you're expecting them to? So when you are making accessible documents, there are some important things that you really, really want to do is check your accessibility while you work. I'm going to show you how to do that in both PowerPoint and Microsoft Word. Another thing is using built-in designs for inclusive reading, orders, color, and so on. And I'll show you a couple of quick examples, but basically, if you are building PowerPoint slides and you're using templates built into PowerPoint, excuse me. Typically, it's putting things in the order that you expect them to be in: title, body of the work, images, etc. Avoid using tables for visual purposes only. Basically, tables are tricky. Tables are especially tricky when you have merged or split cells, because again, screen readers don't know how to read them properly. Or at least there's no guarantee that they'll read them properly. So learning how to make some of these changes are helpful. I'm just going to stop for a second. My big project this summer was making my genetics PowerPoints accessible. I also made our genetics lab manual accessible and our cells and molecules lab manual. So I'm going to kind of just show you sort of simple ways to make that happen. Use accessible hyperlink texts and screen tips, absolutely. And use accessible font format color. Every time you put up a hyperlink, it specifically is in a certain color. Some of those colors are really easy to see. Some of them, there are subtle differences that if you are visually impaired, you may not be able to see easily. Changing it to a darker blue, for example, is a simple, straightforward way to do that. And these tools that are built into things like PowerPoint and Word give you hints, give you ideas of what you might have gotten right or wrong, things that could do with being corrected. So when you are in PowerPoint, there is an accessibility tab that you can click on, and it'll open an accessibility window down here. But if you click on review, it'll open, so you click on review and it'll open a tab that gives you the accessibility options. You click on check accessibility and this will pop up. And there are a couple of different things you'll see. You'll see errors, you'll see warnings. Errors are things that you really, really have to change. Warnings, I would argue you should change because someone's not able to get that information. But focusing on the errors first is a good way to start. Microsoft Word, same thing. You go to the review tab, click on that, click on check accessibility, and you get a window that opens up here. You can actually set it so that accessibility checker is always running. That way you know whether your document is accessible. So I am actually going to open some documents. I'm not going to have you look at the full thing, but here is a PowerPoint presentation for a genetics chapter. Looks perfectly fine, right? I mean, you know, it has titles and it tells you all about the sorts of things that you're going to be covering. But when I run, where did it? Oh, it's hiding behind the, really? Okay. It's okay. We can fix that. There we go. If I click on review,
Can Zoom see?
I don't,
May only be on that presentation, not the full screen. You have the.
you're right. I'm going to change my sharing screen. Okay. Nope.
So
Stop share.
stop share, and then if you share again,
I'm going to share.
just share the, share the whole screen.
Share the whole screen. All right. We're sharing the whole screen. Okay, great. Thank you.
Got a lesson of not being able to get the material.
Well, exactly. And I also have the Zoom link opened here, but yes, thank you for letting me know that you couldn't see it. So here is, again, just a PowerPoint. If I click on review, I have this check accessibility coming up. Before I do that though, here along the bottom, I have it set to always be looking at accessibility. And here this says investigate. What that tells me is something's not accessible. So let's click check accessibility. Now I'm going to make this bigger. And here is my results. I had 83 objects in this PowerPoint that had missing descriptions. I had 9 missing slide titles. I had 7 hard to read text contrasts. Let me pick one of those. Here we go. This is telling me that there's something about this that is not easily visible. So if I change the colors, it may tell me, great, that's it. It actually won't tell me anything. It'll just delete it from my list. Let's talk about missing object descriptions. Slide 1. There is this picture. Okay, this is a picture of snails, and it's relevant to the chapter because something to do with the genetics of these snails is not typical. Doesn't matter for this particular audience. In order for someone who's using a screen reader to know what this says, this is going to have some kind of alternate text. And all of your images should have alternate text. I'm going to right click on that and I'm going to view the alternate text, and oops, I don't have any alternate text. That's not very helpful to someone who is using a screen reader. What I've done is I've gone through this same PowerPoint, made some minor edits that are cosmetic, but if I right click on this image, view alt text, there's alternate text describing what that is. And meanwhile, you're thinking, oh my goodness, do I have to find alternate text for everything I do? A lot of times, the textbook already has that embedded in your images. So if you're copying images from a PowerPoint file directly from the textbook, when you copy and paste, keep source formatting. So if I'm copying, let's copy this. And then if I were to paste something, I have the options of use destination theme, picture. Often I will have keep source formatting. It's not because I'm in the same document. If you keep the source formatting, the alternate text is already there. Now, I wish all textbooks did this all the time. They don't. In 2 of the major courses that I teach, one of them, the textbook is great. Genetics, Pearson has done a great job with this. Other companies sometimes make a half-hearted effort to do this, where they'll post an accessible PowerPoint with selected images rather than the whole thing. So a lot of times you'll be able to find this through your textbook resources. When you copy and paste, make sure that you bring everything with you. Don't just paste it as an image, because that won't include all of this additional stuff. So again, this PowerPoint here is, again, there are some slight cosmetic changes, because as long as I'm changing things, I might as well do that as well. But all of the information in this PowerPoint is exactly the same as the information in the other PowerPoint. Again, many of the slides even look the same, but in this case, I'm missing things like alt text. So I'm going to close those. Don't save changes because I'm happy with my changes. I am going to open one more file. This is a syllabus. It's in Microsoft Word. This is actually one that I have not, okay. This is an old version. This is from 2022. My new version this year is accessible. This one is not, although they look very similar. Just to show you, again, you go to the review button, check accessibility, and you end up with this tab here along the right that tells you what errors you have. I wanted to show you this one specifically because while some of us use PowerPoint more or less, some of us don't, we all use Microsoft Word. And we all make a syllabus, whether it's in that or something else, things that we might not think about, like missing object description. Now, this picture here is a picture of a fruit fly. In reality, it's decorative. So I could have marked it as decorative, but it's a fruit fly, which are used in genetics. So it's probably a better idea to add a description. So something like image of a fruit fly with red eyes. You may want to go into more detail, but at least now there is some context for what this is doing. Again, I chose this one because of the hard to read contrast. It's highlighting this. This particular shade of blue is a low contrast color. It's not the same shade as all the rest of them. So to fix it, it's pretty straightforward. I'm actually going to go back to here, click on font color. Oops. Stockton Cares, click on font color, and go with that darker shade of blue. And now that has disappeared. The last thing I wanted to mention were merged and split cells. This does not need to be a table, but it is a table. And this is a cell here, and this is a cell. And screen readers really don't know what to make of this. When you have a table, you want to make sure that you have the same number of rows and columns all the way through. There are a few different ways to get around that. Sometimes it's really awkward, but what I have found is sometimes the header of a table from a textbook is part of that figure, and it's an all merged cell. If you pop out the title, make that the title of the slide instead, that's a way of fixing that. And some are not so straightforward, but a lot of them are. And as Maria said, not all students who use screen readers are blind. There are other reasons for people to use screen readers. So making sure that your content is accessible to them as possible is really, really helpful. So again, I just wanted to show you a couple of quick little examples. I wanted to make sure that you could see what the screen, what to look for. Our Microsoft software has this for all of us, but there's one other thing I forgot to mention that we all also have access to. We all have access to Adobe Acrobat, the full version. And if you log in through your Stockton account, you can actually run Adobe Acrobat directly on Microsoft Word. Once Microsoft Word, for example, says, okay, your file is completely accessible, great. Then you want to save it maybe as a PDF. If you save it as a PDF directly using Adobe Acrobat, it'll keep all of the accessibility formats. When you upload it onto Blackboard, that little ally symbol is going to show up green. If that little ally symbol shows up a different color, yellow or red, it tells you that you maybe not have a perfectly accessible document. It might give you suggestions on what you can do, but the easiest thing really is to go back to Word or PowerPoint or whatever program that you use and see if you can take a look at their accessibility functions. And that is the end of what I have to say. Do the rest of you have anything else to add? Well, do you guys have questions for any of us?
Question. I noticed that you did an image of a group by rolling image, right?
Yep.
And recently I was reading about alt text, and you didn't have to do that because the screen reader tells them it's reading an image, but I don't actually know. I haven't actually listened to a screen reader to know what's correct.
Okay, so if, let me pull that up again.
I opened Oxford publisher, like PowerPoints from this year. They do use like figure image. They start all their
So there are some screen readers that will identify that it is an image, and there are some that are not.
So it's better to just say.
It is repetitive to the ones that tell you it's an image.
But just saying it's an image just doesn't give you enough information. So again, if it's decorative, if it's purely decorative, just calling it an image is fine. But again, students in this class are going to be using fruit flies a lot. So being able to identify it as a fruit fly is helpful. Having said that, there are also tools that will automatically give you alt text. Some of them are fine. None of them are great. Some are completely useless.
I noticed when I send an image in an email, it tries to describe it. No, I'll fix that.
So yes.
So you say like map instead of image or figure, so it does add that extra.
Yeah, the like higher end screen readers tell them this is an image. So when it reads it, it says, this is an image, this is an image, like it is repetitive. But some of the free screen readers don't identify that it's an image. So
I'd rather give them too much information.
yeah, but most students would probably say leave it out. I still put it in because I know students who don't use the screen readers that identify as an image. So I didn't want it to just be like fruit fly with no context. So yeah, it's one of those kind of fine lines.
Hopefully that improves.
And one thing is, this is required by law. We all have to make our courses accessible. In practical terms, if you don't have someone in your class this semester who is visually impaired or or has an accommodation where they need to use a screen reader, you're okay this semester. But I have to say that spending some time getting your slides or getting your documents accessible before you need them saves a whole lot of aggravation during the semester while you are trying to adapt what you already have. So
Yeah, and the title was of our presentation, like why it's worth it, because to reiterate, you really do become a better teacher in the classroom when you're traveling with students, when you're interacting with them, even virtually, when you're imagining your classroom where someone can't hear, someone can't see quite well, someone is neurodiverse. So taking that into account when you're physically in the classroom goes a really long way to improve learning.
I can say that I knew earlier this summer that I would have a student in my class this fall who cannot see. I learned this week that I also have a student who has accommodations related to not hearing very well. And so I was really grateful that I had previously, a few years ago, made a lot of things accessible so that there's less work. But while you were all talking, I was making a nice little list of things I'm gonna have to like have in front of me to remind myself about reading all the bullets, describing any visual, because there's just a lot to juggle that I'm not used to having to do. But will, I think, make it a better experience for everybody. I'm gonna have to provide myself with memory prompts to do that, I think.
Yeah,
I have to repeat everything that students say,
yes.
and I also have to describe all the visuals.
If you're trying to be able in whatever way you are able, but if you like do this, close your eyes, like just that empathy of imagining really is a quick little check to help too.
So for those of you on Zoom who didn't hear, I'm not going to go through the entire, I'm going to summarize that if you're lucky enough to know that you have a student who's visually impaired early enough, great, or hearing impaired or whatever, having this already done really helps. And it also helps you, and as abled people, sometimes we have to remember to do things like repeat what the student says so that, as I'm attempting to do, but failing miserably, basically not assuming that everyone is going to be able to hear what one student says from one part of the room or the other. So making a concerted effort to do that is really important. And thank you for bringing that up.
Have fun.
I got scared to death, but hopefully it'll go well.
What I failed to mention was you have both a visually impaired and a hearing impaired student in one of your classes this coming semester. I knew I left something out that was important.
We're cutting into your break.
Yes, we are. So we should probably let you guys go. Thank you all for coming.
Let us know if you have any questions or want to ask anything about our experiences during the semester.
Much better after coming. Seeing what they did. I just remember too that there may be.
So at the time they were not. I haven't found that even the most recent version I haven't found has been completely accessible. I've still had to fix things. They should be, you're right.
Because my,
I'm gonna mute this so that people can go on and enjoy their break.